Thank you.
Hey, Treya, when children are born, Natina playing Natina. The song. I am so happy to see everyone here today. Of course, Don would put me last with a hard axe to follow. Yeah. All right. So I'm Kyung-Yuk Hyun. I'm an acorn eater. Acorns were an extremely important food for most California natives. And Natinahue means where the trails return. And when I said Shaninasan, that means that I am letting, really hard to say this, I am telling the earth I am here. And I say her, but it could be, it's a spirit being, it's a living, breathing being. And I'm on the tribal council, and one day when I grow up, maybe I'll be a congressman. I don't know. But I'm back again for my second term. I was on the tribal council in the 1990s, and I was super honored to serve with many of our elder tribal statesmen. Is there any other tribal leaders in the room here? We got a problem, Houston. So I wanted you to know where Hoopa is. Hoopa is in very northern California. We are the largest land-based tribe in California. And we were very fortunate that we refused to go to the forest. So we were able to retain a majority, not all of it, but a majority of our ancestral lands. We are in the process, first time ever, with acquiring private foundation funds to acquire a sacred mountain and 10,000 acres right around on this side that will be soon coming into our land space. So we're really grateful for that. Next. I wanted to tell you a little bit what our creation, this is one of our creation stories. We actually have several. I know it sounds strange, but when Yumanchunye, which translate loosely the one above us, he came and he was visiting Ninisan. He was there, the two spirits were visiting to each other. And as they were visiting in the valley, this beautiful, luscious valley that I grew up in, they saw, Yumanchunye saw the fingers of the mist coming over the mountains. And the animals happen, it's gonna be amazing. And Creator said, I see them coming. And so he took that mist and he created human. He created human Yagan, the acorn eater. And with that knowledge, you had Frog who started hopping around and singing, and Cricket was singing, and Hummingbird was singing, and they were all singing because they were excited that we were coming. And so everyone thought, well, what should we do? What do we do now? And Yumanchunye said, you need to take care of them. You need to take care of them. So the animals thought, well, what can we do? The first one to speak was Oak Tree. Well, they're young. So they're going to be acorn eaters, and they are going to eat my acorns. So that's going to be my gift to them. And so Oak Tree gave us acorns to eat. And then Bear and Kingfisher and Salmon all got together. What can we do? Salmon said, I will give my life for them. And so Bear said, we will help you get on shore. And Kingfisher and Bear helped the fish get on shore. And so together, when we came together, our heart, what am I going to say, became as one. So we were all one people with all of these gifts, and that's how human came. And so I can just kind of imagine it, because in the, we actually have the ability to grow wine, but in the summer, you'll see the fingers of the mist, and that's a reminder of where I came from and how I was formed. Next slide. This is me. Don't laugh, Miss Alaska. I realize these salmon are small, but this is me. This is what I grew up doing. I grew up hunting and fishing. And you can see by the size of the fish that the size of the fish has actually changed because they would actually be much bigger. But that's what's happening to us as a people. This last year, we had an allowable harvest by the federal government of 374 fish. That means the 3,600 got a bite, maybe. And we had to, for the first time, prioritize how we were going to distribute the fish. As a governmental entity of the tribal council, we had to actually have a discussion on how we were going to distribute the fish. And we had our world renewal ceremony, so we needed somebody to go there. We needed that some needed to go to our elders, and maybe we could have a few go to the general public, because that's one of the things we do is we just distribute on a first come, first served basis. It was a very difficult space to be in, where as a governmental body making a decision on who gets fished and how it's distributed. And unfortunately, Jesus wasn't there to like do the magic of multiplying it. So we didn't have that available to us. So, you know, we had to do the best we could. But that's where we're put in. And it concerns me greatly. Next slide. This is my son when he's older and when he's younger. And we are the only tribe that I know of that has a square drum. This is made with a harbor seal fur that he accidentally caught in his net. And we're taught not to waste our gifts. So he had a very steep hill and it rolled down on him like 3 times, and he felt like giving up, but he got it back. And traditionally we would have harvested seals and eaten them. So he was the first one in many, many years that actually did this. And he was super excited to share the seal meat, which it must be an acquired taste. It was pretty hard for me. And he had an explosion with the blubber because he was trying to render the fat and things exploded. Luckily, he was outside when he was doing that. But we learned really young to fish. And so these are a little bit better sized fish. This is my son when he was younger and his cousins. And we all learned to take the boat up. My sons took their first deer when they were 7 and 8. And then they started fishing around the same time. So can you imagine a little 8-year-old rowing a boat across the river? And you're like, are they going to drown? Well, it doesn't happen. Next slide. And so I put up here ancestral taste because we are Kyunyan, we're acorn eaters, and we eat it in a mush consistency. And the men have the elkhorn spoons. And the thing that bothers me is that our traditional foods become foreign to our own people. I love the taste of acorns. I can't really describe it to you except that it's nutty. I absolutely love dried fish. In fact, one time a National Geographic person came to our house to interview my grandfather, and the first thing he said was like, "You have salmon in here?" I was like, "Oh great, my house smells like salmon." And we're like, "Yeah," and they're like, he's like, "Oh, I don't mean to offend." He goes, I'm Jewish, my grandmother's always had lox at her house, and he was like, "I just feel like I'm home." So immediately we went and grabbed the salmon and provided to him. But now we have babies who don't like the taste of fish. And so when we're faced with the lack of resources for our traditional subsistence style living of acorns, and I mean, it's even changing how we prepare acorns. Acorns are typically gathered in the fall, and then they're not eaten until the next fall. They're left in the shell until the next fall. And I think there's a reason for this. I think it has to do with the tannic acids, and maybe they leach more over a year span. But the reason I say that is because today we have people gathering today preparing them, too quickly. And so you can really still taste the tannic acid, which is very bitter. And so we're losing that process. And then when I said, when did you pick these? And how come how come you're not giving me the other stuff, the good stuff? They said it's because our acorns aren't lasting the whole year. So we can't keep them in the shelf that long. So all of these things are, I don't know if I have another slide or not, are impacting us. This is one of the wildfires, and I say one because we have every year. And typically you can see when the smoke was just beginning here, you can see across the river, and then it gets more smoky and then it becomes more smoky. And as a result, we couldn't perform our ceremonies that year because the air quality was so dangerous to human health. We ended up taking my dad to the hospital because he thought he was having a heart attack, and he has cardiovascular issues. And we were operating 5 HEPA filters in the house. Well, we had to buy another one that would sit right by him because it was just simply due to the smoke. And this happens every single year. So what does that mean? It means that our cont'd, this beautiful basket cap that I'm wearing, that was my great grandmother. It means that the materials that we would need to pick to create this we're not able to gather because of the smoke. We're not able to fish because of the smoke. We're not able to do our ceremonies because of the smoke. And it's impacting our very being. We talk about mental health and well-being. If you can't do your ceremonies, and your ceremonies require that you be literally touching Minnesota, connecting to Minnesota, how can you move forward? Next slide. And so our lives are being impacted, our ceremonies are being impacted, our fish are being killed. This was from a picture from 2002, the fish kill that went on. Oh, how nice, the government gave us some disaster relief funds. And so everything we have, I have these 2 pictures because when we build our home, there is a heart and lungs inside that is there to represent that it's a being. When we build our redwood canoes, there's a heart and lung inside because it is a being. Everything is a being, and we're all connected, and it's all impacting. And I guess the sad thing that I will close with is that we should have tribal leaders at the table, and they need to hear these kinds of conversations. Most tribes that are being impacted more heavily than others don't have the funding to come. And in fact, in a couple of weeks, the White House is having their Tribal Nation Summit, and the tribes of the Southeast Oklahoma tribes are giving stipends to tribes who can't afford to come of $2,500 so that they can attend the Tribal Nation Summit. Because, we're not all casino tribes. We don't have grant writers to write the grants. And that's the other problem is, yeah, great that there's this $1 billion out there, but most tribes are poor and they don't have the technical capability of writing the grant. And yet, and I'm just gonna say it won't be popular, tribes who own and operate casinos are the ones who are driving the agendas right now because they have the money, they have the resources, they're able to hire the attorneys. And that's not the same as tribes who don't have it. So, thank you.
Well, please join me in thanking all 3 wonderful, dynamic, intelligent, beautiful Indigenous women leading the charge. So let's give them one more hand. All right.
Having conversation.
Oh, we're done?
No, I think we're, yeah.
Oh, we're done. All right, we're done. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, it's remarkable. There's just so much to cover and so much to think about and talk about it. I wish we had 2 full days just to go over these topics. But I really appreciate the wonderful input. And over lunch, please seek out the speakers for any questions you might have. All right, our next presentation is on Indigenous engagement in connecting climate minds, early lessons on embedding Indigenous priorities and worldviews in global research on climate change and mental health. And our speaker for this session is Leon Zeitz. He's the co-founder of the Climate Mental Health Network and was the first director of youth engagement and advocacy at Cities Rise. He's a global mental health and well-being expert working to make sure all people are supported with love and dignity. He recently received his Master of Divinity degree at Europa University. And he's been a wonderful ally and advocate in this space. And we even had a meeting last night on Zoom that he was able to help facilitate. And it's wonderful that we're looking at the impact of climate change, not just on the physical world and physical health, but also on mental health. So please join me in welcoming Leon to the stage.
Hello. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm so humbled and grateful to be here today. I reside on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people nearby in Maryland. I'm bringing in my wife, Erica, and my parents, Mindy and Paul, here today, just because they make me feel comfortable. And yeah, and I just want to thank the previous panel for all that was shared. And yeah, and especially the NCA 5, which was mentioned, you know, a federal document acknowledging the impacts of settler colonialism is a big deal in my eyes. And we can all kind of name and center kind of where some of these systemic problems stem from and how we do this work. And that translates to what I'm about to share related to mental health. Yeah, and so as mentioned, I'm the co-founder of the Climate Mental Health Network, which was founded to address the mental health consequences of the climate crisis, which are increasingly wide. And today I'm talking about Connecting Climate Minds, which is an international research project that is focused on establishing research priorities on climate change and mental health. And so what are we hearing? All across the world, we are seeing that climate change and mental health are inseparable and increasingly being linked in mainstream practice, whether it's the direct trauma from extreme weather or the ongoing threats and grief related to environmental changes. We're seeing from like a scientific level that during extreme heat, the cases of mental psychosis, suicide, and hospitalization due to mental illness go way up. And it's a threat multiplier for pre-existing conditions. So people that are already dealing with mental health challenges during extreme weather or extreme heat deal with amplified burdens, and our most and least resource communities bear the brunt of these challenges, whether it's having access to mental health support, community support, or resources around culture and healing. And so when we think about climate change, it's really who's bearing the brunt of what's happening. And when things get really, really bad, who's least resourced to respond. And so I think when we take a mental health lens, we really look at that. And we know a lot of the world's young are disproportionately struggling with what's happening, both in terms of directly experiencing environmental crisis, but also the future existential threats that are created around the world. And so we know that it is a present issue, and we're asking ourselves, how do we actually think expansively and holistically about what it means to look at mental health in relation to the climate crisis? And so next slide. And so some of the I think, state of play is that just in recent years, I think in the NCA 5, there was mentions of climate change and mental health. Recently, you know, there's been a federal policy brief on climate change and mental health. And so we're seeing that at a mainstream level, people are starting to talk about this more, and that's very exciting. But it also bears to question, how do we address mental health in diverse cultures and diverse communities in ways that's not exporting one way of being or knowing about how to deal with these issues. And it's, I mean, I guess it's nice to see fancy acknowledgements and reports about this, but the lived reality is that communities are experiencing these challenges And the pace of response is just not commensurate with the problem. And anyway, I mean, we see that with climate, but with mental health, a historically underappreciated issue, it is just vastly underappreciated, resourced, and responded to at all levels. And so, next slide, please. So one of the analyses that we had was just that the field is largely disconnected. There is a predominance of research from Europe and North America, from white-leaning institutions, from certain populations. We know that 77% of all studies on climate change and mental health were carried out in high-income countries. So this is how kind of knowledge and power work, and how who's owning the story about how we respond plays out in practice. And so it's of great concern, I think, and also just a way to think very critically about what information we're seeing. And it's also very siloed. So out of the 95 countries that have a mental health and psychosocial support plan, a climate change plan, only 9 mention mental health. And so in terms of like the global response and inclusion of mental health, it's very nearly absent and increasingly being looked at as well. Next slide. And so for the Connecting Climate Minds project, it's an international group of collaborators that were really inspired to create connections through dialogue. And so what has happened is that it was a 1-year funded project by the Wellcome Trust, which is a UK-based research funder, and led by Imperial College London. And across all 7 regions of the world, there were dialogues that were hosted, next slide please, with researchers, community members, policymakers, practitioners, and funders. So for instance, the Planetary Health Alliance is the North America regional convener that is bringing groups together. And alongside each of those groups, there was youth advisors and lived experience advisors. Next slide, please. And so one of the things that I was tasked with is that alongside the regional dialogues at the top, we held a series of youth dialogues, indigenous dialogues, and dialogues with smallholder farmers, farm laborers, and fisher people. And my work was really looking at how do we create inclusive process, like what is the process, not as much the outcome, but how do we make a global research effort tend to process in a way that creates right relations, that doesn't further colonial harms, that doesn't further extractive practices that are not in support of the values that a lot of woke people talk about. And so today I'm just going to be talking about the Indigenous Dialogues workstream, but I wanted to paint that context. All of, one back please. All of this work is really formulating a global research and action agenda, which is a tool used in research communities to set priorities for research. And so all of the information I'm sharing, the ultimate goal is to create an agenda on what researchers and funders and policymakers can channel research towards. Next slide, please. So far, 650 people have joined these dialogues internationally from across regions of the world. And this is not Indigenous people and nations oriented, but some of the insights from Eastern and South Asia, the term mental health is not necessarily something that communities use on an everyday basis. There's a need to localize mental health and dimensionalize it in culturally relevant ways. And I just love this feeling of community and collectiveness, which comes from dialogues. So dialogues are different than a focus group where it's one person actually like being asked a question. It's actually a gathering where people from diverse backgrounds, from diverse places actually get to come together and talk. And the generative flow of conversation is the research. And so it's just been really beautiful to connect people from across different countries and continents. And you see there's just been a moment in dialogues where the crickets and silence transitions into like substantive ahas and people start flowing and the conversation just starts going. And it's magical. And so for me personally, I'd never been a part of a research process like that. And I recommend for other researchers out there, like different than focus groups or other types of research, dialogues are an amazing form that you can actually adhere to and integrate more relational and communal values than like a unidirectional research process where knowledge is only going one way. Next slide, please. And so the core question was that how do we tailor the research to meaningfully engage in co-create processes with these populations? And so when it came to Indigenous populations and nations, the first thing was, do we lead with the term mental health? And it was quickly no. That actually creates an innate biomedical Western frame that would create a lens in which the whole research would flow. This was different than the whole global research process. So, the people that we were reporting to were asking, like, would you do this? How do you justify it? But what would it mean to actually take the term out? And we really landed on actually saying emotional, spiritual, and like the emotional, spiritual, and health of people and place, territories, lands, and waters. That's what we said what encompassed mental health. And that's how we approached Indigenous people and groups when we entered those spaces, rather than saying we're here to just talk about mental health. And that instantly created a tonal shift, in my view, about how we were received as researchers, and also what agendas or knowledge tropes that we were bringing into spaces. And so that was really important. Next slide, please. And so we've been I'm non-Indigenous, but we quickly created a Indigenous advisory group, some of which are in this room. Dr. Donald Warm, Faraz Ridzuan from Singapore, Kasani Upward, who's an Aboriginal doctoral student in Australia, Dr. Kyle Hill, my co-collaborator and convener of a lot of this work, Maria Filizione Martina, who is an amazing person in general, Sierra Duncan, who's a doctoral researcher from Japan, Dr. Alison Kelleher, who's here, and Dr. Kenneth Yongambi Anchang. And so we had a group who's convened and guided us on this work, both from a advisory role, but also a co-creation where I've asked questions and gave guidance on every step of the process from these members. And in our dialogue that we hosted last night, many of these members of our advisory group were actually co-facilitators and speakers that actually held the space that we were leading. Next slide, please. So over the last year, we've had 3 different engagements with Indigenous peoples and nations. The first was on August 9th at the UNITAR Global Indigenous Youth Summit. This was a 24-hour live stream event across each time zone of the world, where Indigenous young people were gathering to exchange practices and knowledge and wisdom and stories on climate change. And we just participated in this as allies. We weren't extracting knowledge or research. It was a form of giving and reciprocity before any research had actually been initiated. And it was a great way for us. We did a presentation on climate change and mental health, and we hosted a storytelling event. But the process practice was try to give first before going in with ask. Like, we were intentional about trying to create offerings for the Indigenous peoples that we were hoping to work with before we were leading in with, we want to learn from you. And I just think that that intention of reciprocity and in coming with offerings is a different type of process than you normally see in research institutions. The second was a model for inter-community dialogues. And so during the research process, it was very clear that if you're just doing virtual dialogues, then you're pretty much negating mass amounts of Indigenous people from being able to engage in this sort of work. And you're stripping away the act of actually coming together in community, which is a core part of Indigenous knowledge sharing that we learned. And so while Zoom is an amazing connective tool, how could we create an in-person component? And so we actually created a sub-granting process where we granted community partners, one in the Peruvian Amazon region and one in Cameroon, and one hopefully in Australia, to host their own inter-community dialogue without us there, without kind of researchers flying in or anything like that. We provided the money and the resources to be able to do it. The guiding kind of frame that our partners actually had the opportunity to totally throw out the window, and we would still work with them. And that did happen because we had questions around mental health and things, and they said, it's not relevant. We're not going to do that. And we were like, wonderful, please explain why. And we got amazing responses about why there were intentional choices to not say mental health in community settings. And so I'll share more about these processes. And then the virtual Indigenous dialogue, which just happened last night. It was a 2.5-hour dialogue, which I'll share more about. But for this 1-year project, these were the different components. Oh, next slide, please. So some of the tensions that we've been grappling with, one was accounting for the vast diversity within this broad identity group. Indigenous people are not homogenous, Indigenous nations are not homogenous. Knowledge that you generate from one group or learn from one group does not translate to another. And it's so, it can be so reductive when blanket statements are made and when generalizations are created that don't own the diversity of these population groups. And so we were both in terms of the asks of the research. So for instance, like we want the 10 research priorities of Indigenous people around the world. Like that was a legitimate ask I was given. And we had to say no, like we will give how process works. We will tell you how we worked with communities, but we're not gonna fall into the traps of generalizations, which do happen. The second was the pace of trust versus the pace of the project. So this money was originally granted in January of last year. The dialogues were supposed to happen in July and August, and it just happened last night. And so we had a lot of pushback, but we also knew that the relationship building in the onset really mattered. And so all the other dialogues happened way before, but the way to engage and build trust meant at least from my side, curbing the pressures that be from institutions to go fast, to rush, to skip process, to actually engage in trust building, which can just happen in relationships and over time, but it doesn't happen overnight and it doesn't happen in a month and it doesn't happen with like a cold email asking someone to show up. So that was one of the tensions. The other was creating spaciousness for definitions of indigeneity. So in North America, First Nations and Native Americans, it's almost a clear binary group, but in other contexts, whether it's the African region or Asian region, notions of indigeneity are widely held by people, but in a global research project, it can be easy to create a narrow or reductive view of indigeneity. And so how do you actually hold an expansive view, particularly in a post-colonial context? So Afro-indigeneity, even in US context, or people that were taken from their ancestral lands and moved other, if there was a sense that somebody did have an indigenous identity that wasn't tied to like white settler colonialism as a white settler, then we wanted to create space in our conversations that enabled that. And then the last tension was knowledge extraction versus knowledge sharing. And so I'll talk a little bit about this now, but it was ultimately related to how we held knowledge. So next slide, please. So we took a lot of guidance from the Indigenous data sovereignty movement around principles of respect for person, concern for welfare, mutual benefit, and transparency. And ultimately, when we created this global research project, it was not built around upholding Indigenous data sovereignty. So the consent forms, the way data was held, all went to Imperial College London. And so we had to totally, go through IRB processes over and over to restructure the entire project to uphold Indigenous data sovereignty in the project. And the challenge was we got a lot of pushback and we had to write, long analyses and, ethics boards. But what I have to say is the knowledge and the practice exists. There's a lot of lessons from Australia, New Zealand, Canada in particular, some from the US, but particularly around like data sovereignty practices. There's a huge movement that we just learned from around this work. Next slide. And so what we did was we were able to uphold intellectual property rights of Indigenous communities and knowledge and solidify Indigenous nations' data ownership. So Imperial College London, who was the head of this project, couldn't own the data from this work, which was a big whoa for them. But what it translated to was in the actual contracting agreements, in the consent forms, there was specific language about where the data is owned, what the sharing practice is, and the full and unquestionable ownership of the nations we were working with on their ability to retract data, change data, say we can't use data, in all of those ways. And I think for a global research project where this was different is that we had to embed these practices in a system that didn't operate that way. And that was what was particularly interesting. Next slide. And so for consent structures, we had two key processes. One was collective consent and the other was individual consent. So the collective consent process helped balance Indigenous sovereignty and collective ownership of knowledge versus more Western individual ideas of consent. We used both processes, but we went for the collective consent first. So we were not targeting individuals. We were going through tribal authorities. We were going through the king and the Com Kingdom in Cameroon, and we had to go through those formalities. And then we were able to also do individual consent, but we also did audio recorded consent and we accepted fingerprints because, for instance, in the Caribbean region, many of the people that we engaged didn't write their full name, so we collected fingerprint. These were all adaptations that the global research project didn't make at the beginning, but we had to make through the process, and it was really important. Next slide, please. And so just from our two inter-community dialogues that were held, one was by our community partner called Wamanwasi in Peru, and the other was the Ibicon Community Climate Mental Health Literacy Project in Cameroon and Nigeria. Next slide, please. And so in the inter-community dialogue in Peru, we had 150 people join from 3 provinces in the San Martin region. And some of the offerings that they just provided back to us, there was an intentional deviation from saying mental health or salud mental in Spanish, and the inseparability of psychological and spiritual health with tending to the land. And they have their own cosmovision of the links between humans and seeds that were intrinsic to them. And so like other presenters shared earlier, this relationship of tending to the land, to seeds, to ancestral foods, to traditional healing methods, all are tied to mental health. And so going in with like a biomedical lens would have erased the reality of all of these connections. And so I can share these slides and keep moving. Next slide, please. And so, for instance, I got specific permission to share these photos today with all of you. And so anytime we share photos that were provided to us, we ask again for ongoing, informed, and proactive consent, which I think is about integrity, I guess, in research, but it often doesn't happen. And so I think that's the important process piece. But in the intercommunity dialogue in Peru, there was a seed exchange amongst communities. There was explanations of traditional extraction of herbs and the production of natural medicines. And so in the way that they created their intercommunity dialogue around mental health, it actually centered around seed exchange and intergenerational knowledge sharing. And so that for us was really valuable, but it also said, this is a great way to, support healing and practice, rather than, overhanding like a biomedical mental health approach. Next slide, please. And so last night, getting on the last slide, we had 25 participants across like 7 or 8 different time zones. So there was some people up at 2 in the morning. There was some people that it was like first thing in the morning that joined. And some of the just like quick quotes from last night is, it hurts the community not being able to take care of their country and communities. And what is the time frame of change? Change have been happening and occurring for 200 plus years, matter of spectrum over generations, not just immediate, but generational trauma occurring. And one of the things we heard in our dialogue that if we really engage all sentient life and all beings, this like emergence of intergenerational trauma also needs to extend to plants, animals, rocks, and the land. It's been centered in a very humanistic view of intergenerational trauma, but we also have to look at how the trees and the animals have also gone through those generational cycles of harm linked to settler colonialism at the end of the day, that we can hold space for all of that. And so, next slide. And I know this is a complex slide, but in every one of our dialogues, we have a graphic designer who joins the conversation, and at the end of the dialogue, they do the big reveal. And so just to kind of they're normally not so complicated, but we had people speaking in 2 languages last night, and we asked the graphic designer to embed both languages throughout the document. And so it has a lot to go through, but on the left, there's the animus, the animal connections that people brought, whether it's the raven, dolphin, magpie, cats, coral, and the connection to the rebalancing of indigenous systems. Here at the bottom, there was a triangular framework that was provided by an indigenous leader around at the top of the triangle is nature being okay and nature having healing. In the middle is spiritual connection to the land. And at the bottom is the physical identity and cohesion as just a general framework for looking at mental health through the lens of an indigenous perspective. And so I think the moral of all of this, I hope it wasn't necessarily anything new, but the ability to tend to process as the impact of doing this work, at least in a global research project working with multinational institutions built off the backs of broken practices, is possible. And it can happen by creating a crew that you're navigating the mess with. And yeah, so I just want to shout out my colleague Maria, who has been a big ally in all of that work. And thank you to our advisors who have supported it. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you so much, Leanne, and it's wonderful to be a part of the process, and it's great to see genuine community engagement in the work. So just absolutely wonderful. So before we break for lunch, we actually have a short video that we will show, and then we'll have a lunch break, and then we're very fortunate to have a keynote address during lunch from the Assistant Secretary of Interior, Mr. Brian Newland. But we'll go ahead and show the video and then break for lunch right after that.
So this is a part of the preservation, and this offering is a way that we tell our story in a way that we still continue to do these practices in a healthy way to balance our mind, body, spirit, and our mental well-being. And so this offering is just for all of us, for the work that we're doing here and being in the space in the sacred Hogan. And this is a female Hogan, so it's an offering for the matriarch society in the way that the women folk carry a lot of the culture and the teachings and the norms, and they hold space in the home. And this is also a part of the process, is the making of the food, the making of the prayer, and the way that we do things in a good way, in a beautiful way. And that's how we start off, is doing our offering to these sacred elements that help care for us every day, our well-being. And so these elements are going to be very present with us today.
Yat e she Beverly Gorman she. But anik ashchi ein slido shkazo hebashchin. Do she hey dashnaldo twachi ni e dashiche. I introduce myself as Beverly Gorman, and then my traditional name is Doshbire. My dad gave me that name, and it's usually given by a warrior. And my clan is under her cover clan with a red streak arrow. My second clan is yucca fruit strung in a line clan. And my grandfather on my maternal side is a Hopi. My paternal side is a Salt clan. And that's how we interpret ourselves to our relatives. So we know who our relatives are, and they know who we are. It has been taught from our elders and from the time that the Creator had put everything together, that each one of us, there is a purpose for us on this earth. There's a reason why we were born. Say, the Kodosi Hasan Hasangi is where you begin. The humbleness here on Mother Earth. You step on it, you become one. You're humble not only with yourself, but everything around you. Your Mother Earth, the air, the sky, the universe. Ehesen. It's more passion of being who you are within your humbleness. The word Hojon Nashado is saying, I will walk in beauty. That's the ultimate interpretation. But the meaning of Hojon Nashado, meaning that you're taking your whole being, your spirit, because that's where the first breath that was put in you when you took your first breath as a baby, that was Hojon. That's your first Hojonja. In a good way, everything has opened the doors in life, in your journey. So when you say Hojon Nashado, Hojon Nanstado, that's where it comes in. I want to continue my journey in this good path, in a humble way, in a sacred way, the way I was put on this earth, the way you put me here, for who I'm supposed to be, and my work here, my journey, the purpose of who I am. That's a real deep connection to that Hojon, do hujona shado, jona na dato. Jono e bananit edo. You know, whatever is going to be out there is going to be good for them again. And my grandma always says, you know, you ever need me, I'm just a breath away. I'm right here. Where you just said, I'm right there. You call upon me and I'll be there. I'll carry the message to the creators and to the spirit people.
So beautifully produced, and I find it so striking how beautiful our lands are, how beautiful our languages are, and our cultures and our people. And we know that in the past, we've had some real significant challenges with our family units being torn apart in many ways because of things like boarding schools. And this is a good transition into our next part of our discussions for today, is to look at the health of our children and the protecting the future generation. So we're just so deeply honored to have as our keynote speaker for lunchtime, Mr. Brian Newland. He is a citizen of the Bay Mills Indian community of Ojibwe, where he recently completed his tenure as a tribal president. Prior to that, Brian served as chief judge of the Bay Mills Tribal Court. From 2009 to 2012, he served as a counselor and policy advisor to the Assistant Secretary of the Interior for Indian Affairs. He's a graduate of Michigan State University and the Michigan State University College of Law. And he's currently serves as the United States Assistant Secretary of the Interior for Indian Affairs. And he was the lead author on the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative Investigative Report. And if you haven't read that, I would really encourage you to do that. It was incredibly well put together. And we're just so deeply honored to have him share some time with us this afternoon. So please join me in welcoming Brian Newland.
Hey. Always weird to speak during lunch because if you're like me, you like food. And so you're always wanting to focus on tasty food. First, let me say, Ani Buju and away Maganadu. Gishigat, Nibanami, Kanan Bamose, Indigenous Mangan, Dodem, Ganoshi Kani, Donjaba, Nishnabe, and my name is Walks Many Paths. That's the name my grandmother gave to me. In my naming ceremony later in life, I was an adult before I got that name. And we can get into that a little bit. I am of the Wolf Clan, and I come from the place of the Pike, or Bay Mills Indian community, and I am Anishinaabe. And I said, Wujun in a way, Magna, that means hello, all of my relatives. I'm really glad to be here with you today, honored and grateful that you're sharing your time with me. And I do want to give a special Chimagwich or many thanks to Dr. Warren and the Johns Hopkins Center here. I've got a personal or a family connection to Johns Hopkins. My wife's grandfather attended Johns Hopkins. I'm not certain whether he graduated or not. He may have. That was a long, long time ago. But also when I was tribal president, I ran for tribal president in 2017. All these grand plans about things we were going to do to improve our community in the long term, and then the pandemic hit. And one of the things that's kind of been frustrating for me, just personally, is the collective amnesia I think a lot of people have about especially the early days of COVID-19. But I didn't forget. And it was incredibly challenging. We didn't have a lot of information. We didn't know what, you guys may remember, everyone was afraid because we didn't know. We didn't know what we were dealing with. And I was on the Johns Hopkins website 5 or 6 times a day getting data and trying to understand with our community health team from our tribe to help protect our community and our people from that virus. And we wouldn't have been able to do what we did without Johns Hopkins. So if anyone here in the room was a part of that effort, I want to extend the gratitude to you and let you know that your work saved lives. Your work saved their lives. And people, you may not even know. And I'm proud to say in our community, we were able to have a disproportionately low rate of COVID transmission, even compared to our neighboring communities. And we had, I hate saying it only, but we lost one person throughout the whole pandemic. And that was in great part because of the work that folks at Johns Hopkins and other public health institutions did to explain to us people who don't know about health what we were dealing with and providing real-time data to help us make decisions. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for the work that you all did. When I give public remarks in this position, they usually, we have prepared remarks. And I'm going to use them as a guide today because I really want to make sure I'm also leaving room for questions and dialogue. But to talk about boarding schools and our work to deal with the legacy of those schools, which is really part of the legacy of colonization that we still live with. As Indian people, really as American people, this country lives with that legacy. The gains and the losses and the health impacts of that colonization process are still affecting every single one of us in this room. And there isn't an Indian person I've met or I know in this country who isn't affected directly by these boarding schools. So I was back home in my community last week for the holiday, and it's Native Heritage Month. And the art gallery in Sault Ste. Marie, which is the main town not far from where we're at, had a Native Heritage Month exhibit and of artwork. And the artwork they put on display was all my family's art. And so I got to visit that gallery and sit in the room with paintings and sculptures from my great-grandfather and my grandfather and his brothers, my aunties and uncles, my cousins, my mom, my sister, my daughter. It was all of our family. And it was really a tradition, a family tradition that was started by my great-grandfather, John Bowen. And he died when I was about 2 years old, so I don't really have a lot of memories from him. But he was prolific landscape painter, self-taught, and he would, because he grew up Indian and was poor, he didn't have access to a lot of resources and materials or teachers, so he just grabbed whatever paint he had, usually house paint, and any materials he could find, and he would paint the landscapes of northern Michigan. He would sell it to make money, to put food on the table. So I didn't know a lot about my great-grandfather, but as part of this exhibit, they had my relatives put together the story of our family, and there were some old news articles about my great-grandfather and his art that they had on display as well. And I knew he had gone to the Holy Childhood boarding school in Harbor Springs, Michigan, but I didn't really ever know about his experiences. And so he described in this article directly from himself about his experience at boarding schools as a child. He never knew his dad. And in that article, he says he barely had any memories of his own mother. And that every day when he got up, he had to run 5 miles as a kid. How many of you can run 5 miles right now? He had to run 5 miles before breakfast every day. And he went through that and then ended up leaving his community where the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians are now, and being raised by another family. He traveled around and was a chef and a cook for a lot of the freighters that traveled the Great Lakes. And then in his mid-30s, taught himself how to paint. And so I was sitting in that room in that art gallery with this display of all my family's art, and I was thinking of my great-grandfather as a little boy at boarding school, and how all that beauty that I was looking at in that room, how that sprung forth from a little boy at boarding school who didn't know his parents. And you know, he made something beautiful of it, and our family ended up making something beautiful of it. But it was a very powerful moment for me, considering this work that we're doing at the Department of the Interior. But it also shows, I think, a lot of things: the resilience, the creativity of Indian people, but also, you know, what we were robbed of. Grew up without a mom or a dad. It was very moving for me to sit in that room after having done this work and helped to put this report together, to feel it viscerally, that impact of these boarding schools. You know, our work at the Department of the Interior is not, you know, people don't think of us as a health agency at the Bureau of Indian Affairs or at the Department of the Interior, but I think I don't have to tell everybody here about the connection between everything and how that impacts our health, right? And so we know that because of this legacy of colonization, when you take the lands of people that are worth, in today's dollars, billions and billions of dollars, you take people's wealth, you take people's family, you take their self-identity, that is going to have a lasting impact on your physical and mental well-being. And if those of you who had a chance to read this report that we've put together, we can also see that we've been able to rely on studies like the Running Bear studies to show that Indian people today, even if they never went to boarding school, are suffering detrimental physical health impacts from the people in their family who did go to boarding school. So this colonization process, this forced assimilation, it was a violent process. And we see that now manifest in so many ways in our own tribal communities, through substance abuse, through suicides, through violence in our communities. And that's all comes from that legacy. Secretary Holland, when she speaks about these issues, will often say, you know, people look at Indian people today and you know, they say like they want to focus on problems and challenges in our communities, but that's not the way that we were. That's not who we are. We were made, this situation was made this way. It didn't just come about because of Indian people having the propensity to commit violence and drink and live in poverty. And so, you know, I often get asked a lot, what's the point of your boarding school? I do this. Are you trying to make people feel guilty? You know, the first step in healing is to tell the truth, is to acknowledge what happened. And to heal people on an individual level, you have to affirm their human dignity. How many of you have an experience in your life where you saw something, you heard something directly, and somebody says, I don't believe you. Lots of people. Isn't that maddening? Isn't it maddening when somebody says your lived experience isn't real? I know better about your life than you do. Right? And that's when it comes to these boarding schools, that's the reality for a lot of Indian people. And so before we can set ourselves on a course of healing, we have to tell the truth about what happened. And so this report, this first volume of this report, is the first step in that effort. The federal government has never before held itself accountable for its role in operating these assimilationist boarding schools. We've never created a list of which schools were the federal government operated or supported. So for the first time in the history of this country, we published and created a list that says, here's what we did and here's where we did it. And now, moving forward in the course of our work, we are moving toward a second volume of this report where we're going to aim to tell how much money the United States spent on this system. We're going to try to identify how many kids died at these schools. We're going to also try to identify where the kids who went to these schools, where they came from, and really tell the whole picture, the big picture, and to speak the truth about what we did. Not as a way to tell people you should feel bad, not as a way to guilt trip people, but to acknowledge and affirm the lived experiences of Indian people, to acknowledge and affirm that the United States government did this as part of an explicit policy, intentionally, and to chart a path forward to heal our relationship between the United States and tribal nations. We are in a legal trust relationship between the federal government and tribes. And so we've got this legal obligation to work for the betterment of Indian people. Also to chart a path for healing for tribal communities, for families, and for individuals. And so that's what we're aiming to do and do this. And to heal our relationships as Indian people with our ancestors and with those who will come after us. And this is a way that we can work to improve the public health of this country and improve public health in tribal communities. And so, when you think about things like lower life expectancy in tribal communities, literacy rates, substance abuse, all these negative public health things that I think most of you are trying to dedicate your lives to addressing and fixing. They all flow out of that. And so when you think about healing and what that means, you think about affirming people's identity, reaffirming, reestablishing, healing their own family connections. I tell a story about Secretary Holland and I went and did 12 listening sessions across the country to hear from people who went to boarding schools and their family members. And at one particular place, this woman, she was about my age, she stood up and spoke and she said, my whole life I didn't have a good relationship with my mom and I never understood it. It seemed like she was mean. There wasn't a lot of affection in our household. And she said that she had worked at the Urban Indian Health Center out west and then a letter came in and it just happened to land on her desk and this woman had written the center and said that she was searching for her friend from boarding school and that she heard that her friend from boarding school might be living in that area and was looking for help. And she included a picture and that woman who was speaking stood up and said there was a picture of my mom. And she never knew that her mom was taken and went to boarding school. And then her mom got up, was seated next to her and told her story. And so when you think about people say, what's the relevance of this? Telling these stories, what does it serve? You had two living people there, Indian people, American citizens, whose whole relationship with each other, their whole concept of their family identity was altered because of these boarding schools. And so by telling these stories, by affirming their lived experience, by telling the truth and being accountable, we can then build that trust to work together, to build a healing relationship that puts back the things that were taken, tribal languages, ceremonies, families, communities, and making things whole. And I'll end my remarks just with this. When Secretary Holland and I traveled to Australia, where Aboriginal people, as many of you, most of you know, that they dealt with the same process of colonization by many of the same forces, and was speaking with some folks there about their residential schools in Australia. And there was a woman there, she was one of the first Aboriginal doctors in Australia, and she was saying, people often ask me when this work is going to be done. And she said, when it'll be done when we raise an entire generation of Aboriginal people who don't have to deal with any of this stuff. And more recently, when I visited Canada and we spoke with some tribal leaders there, one of them said, this work is not a project. People in government always think about projects and to-do lists. There's no ending. There's no date that it will be done because it's a process. Healing is a process and living and wellness is a process. And so I'm honored to work under the president, the first president in the history of this country whose administration has accounted for this. I'm honored to work for a secretary who had the courage to take this on. I'm honored to work with just a brilliant, dedicated team of people, most of whom are Native and have their own family stories about this. I see on here, it said that as the author of the Federal Indian Boarding School Report, when you get appointed as assistant secretary, you get to put your name on lots of stuff that was developed by lots of people. But I want to especially acknowledge a young man in our office named Joaquin Gallegos, who's Hickory Apache in Santa Ana Pueblo, who did the hard labor of sitting down and drafting most of what's in the report under my name. This has been a very painful but necessary and passionate project for all of us. And it's just been such an honor. So I want to thank all of you for the work you do. I want to say Chima Gwitch, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys might have. Wow. When you get in a room full of lawyers, there's lots of questions.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to have you here, and your courage and your heart is so evident in the work that you do. And I'm so grateful for you sharing that, everything with us. I just wanted to know, what do you hope will happen after the next volume comes out? What's your hope for policy change? What can we ask of our government that we can all support?
That's a great question. So, we will have a formal set of recommendations like we did in the first volume of the report. But, a lot of this healing work that has to happen also has to be done at a personal and community level as well. And so one of the things that the federal government is great at is mobilizing big things and lots of resources towards large issues. But the hard work, the hand-to-hand work that has to happen is got to be done locally. And so what I believe that this work, when they unearthed the mass grave in Canada at the Kamloops School, there was really galvanized people to think about these things. And I believe that this work, when I say our work, I don't mean me and other federal officials, because we're all doing this together. I believe our work has pierced the consciousness of people. And you can see references to boarding schools in popular culture. when I was at the Supreme Court for the oral arguments for the Indian Child Welfare Act case, I can't tell you how many questions there were about boarding schools. I lost count. And then, that led to the Supreme Court citing this work and other work related to boarding schools to uphold the Indian Child Welfare Act. If we, the federal government, had the legal power to do these bad things, we should have the legal power to fix it. So that's what I hope comes out of this, is that the consciousness and the awareness amongst people continues to grow, and that it empowers people to do the work at the local level that, quite honestly, the federal government can support but can't do. And that's, personally, that's what I would like to see. I'll just add, because healing looks different for everybody, because everyone has different levels of experiences and intergenerational trauma, and that's got to be done on a very local.
So, thank you for that. Non-native, AC white, and I'm just wondering, this work is so important. Will it be shared? I mean, I'm sure it'll be shared with all the tribes, and it seems, politics is local, emergency. How does the word get out to people who need to be allies in the recovery and in the healing? How is that done? Because people, they don't know. There's so much information coming at people all the time. This is one more story, or this is whatever it ends up to be. But is there a plan, or what would you advise or suggest so that non-native people can help to step up and say, yeah, this, bad things were done, injustices were done, and this is the fallout. And we need to do what we can to help with the healing process. And sometimes that's a really hard conversation. And I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts.
Thank you for that question. So right now we are at the seed planting stage of this, right? So where we are accounting for. I don't want to say like what was done. We are accounting. I'm a federal official. We are accounting for what we did, and then we are also engaged as part of this initiative to hear people, to document people's first person accounts through this thing called the Oral History Project, where people will share their lived experience in their own words, and that will become part of the public record of this nation. And then so having this information there and having it prepared, the federal government does a report or initiative that's a legitimizing force, right? So when we say in our own words as the federal government, here's what we did, and then people get their firsthand account, that empowers everyone else to take that information and say, where do we go from here? And so I think that's where things need to move. I will say that the federal government, throughout our history, has not worked very well when we've told Indian people, here's what we think you should. We'll decide for you. And so we certainly don't want to do that. But I will just, one final example related to what you were sharing. I grew up at Bay Mills Indian Community, is a small land-based tribe. We don't have a reservation that's hundreds of thousands of acres. I went to public school off the res, and our school was about 50-50 native kids and non-native kids. And everybody knows everyone. We all grew up together. And since we started this initiative, and I go home and see some of my old friends from people I knew from high school and their families, I've had a number of people say, are you involved in this boarding school thing? And I say, yes. And they're like, oh, I never knew. And these are people who grew up literally with Indian people going to school every day. And now they're thinking about it and knowing about it. It's kind of exasperating at first to say, you've known me our whole life. How can you, did I never mention this? But I think this is piercing the consciousness, and that's a big part of what needs to be.
how do you move this work into other spaces, not just in information-wise, but also policy-wise, specifically around Department of Education or health? And so it doesn't just happen again, but we actually do change structures and value systems that led to issues like these.
Well, that's a great question. Again, I want to talk about, what the federal government can do is support work. So we want to, one of the things that we've already begun is to try to put more money into native language revitalization. I think when people use a language on a daily basis, they take for granted the things it does. But when you're a baby, you're a young kid, you communicate what you need using your words, right? And then later on, you can express yourself, your personality, and everything that makes you you through your language. And the same is true for any person using their language. And that was, India, as one speaker at one of these listening sessions said, I hate when people say we lost our language. I wasn't walking down the street and it fell out of my pocket. He said it was taken. It was taken from us. And so part of the healing process, part of our obligation, frankly, as a federal government, we have a trust obligation to protect Indian people, protect our Indian people's existence, protect tribal existence, but to protect the existence of Indian people as Indian people. And so through things like language revitalization and restoring a lot of those tribal, familial, cultural connections, that is one piece of it. So that's something that we can do. I don't want to get too deep into other policy prescriptions because again, the forthcoming work will speak more to that. But certainly addressing all of these other things like the connection between Indian people and land, protecting Indian families, so that, as you say, kids aren't taken away anymore. The boarding schools morphed into forced foster care and adoption. We fought really hard to protect the Indian Child Welfare Act, and now that we won that legal victory, are working to do that better. Do the Indian Child Welfare Act work better and support tribes in that effort. And so these, restoring and revitalizing languages, cultural practices, the spaces in which cultural practices have to occur, the physical spaces, and keeping families together, creating an environment for economic opportunity and cultural expression through Indian arts, which is another thing that we're working on. All of those are all pieces of this puzzle. But everything in this work, as you all know, in the public health field, everything's connected, interconnected and forward and backward. And the last thing, because I know I'm out of time, I was very recently learned about our Ojibwe language and some of the teachings in there. In our word, we talk about healing, and a lot of tribes have 7 generations. This concept of making sure your actions, you're thinking consciously about how that will affect the coming 7 generations. In our Ojibwe language, our word for ancestor, Manikobajigan, is the same as our word for the people who come after. They're the same. And so I was thinking about that when I was at the art show with my family's art, that the healing process also heals the people who came before us. And it heals our families. It heals, by healing them, we're healing our children too. And so that's all of this work is all connected to that. So I try not to get too deep as a bureaucrat into the to-do list, in the project list, because this is going to have to be a process. And it's a process that will continue long after I'm gone from this job and long after I'm gone from this earth. Chimagwich, thank all of you for all of the work you do. I'm so grateful again to have your time and to have the opportunity to come here today. Thank you.
Actually, I'd like to ask our executive director, Allison Marlowe, and our co-director, Ms. Walls, to come up here. We have a gift for Mr. Newland and honoring all the important work that you do on behalf of all of us. And this beautiful ledger arcade here.
That you signed.
Yeah. You read this as Johns Hopkins Center for Indigenous Health is honored to present a Healing Through Truth Award to Secretary Deb Holland and Assistant Secretary Brian Newland and the respective offices for their leadership, determination, and courage to bring forward the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative Investigative Report. This award is a cultural gift of ledger art made by a family member of our center's team, Mr. Robert Fisher Upham, back here. Let's give him a hand. And this is presented as a cultural exchange on behalf of the Johns Hopkins Center for Indigenous Health staff and all the tribes with which the center works. We are here to honor your efforts and lead our strength to the continued journey forward for truth and healing from historical trauma for Indigenous peoples and our nation. So thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Did I say it be working?
Yeah, we're talking my niece, her grandfather. Said that from Montana, Uncle, the last name of my dad was Dempsey, and Robert Dempsey and Jeffrey Uncle went to my Indian school again. And so, I only say that because somehow this is a piece of a puzzle. And she was asking how to do it over here. We didn't know how to ship it because she got maybe 2 weeks ago. So and then, so I cut it up. I cut it up and put it backwards. And I thought, this is kind of reverse painting. I can actually take it apart and get a piece of it. So I went to, I was born in a Catholic home for unborn mothers. My mom was pregnant by my real father from the Kootenai Reservation in Allen, Montana, and out of the 35 Indian, I never know Indian kids, but out of the 35 kids that were in that home, 5 kept their children. So I was just on the edge of being adopted on and my children are from all reservation, and fortunately, we say about these meals, I'm teaching my children that we're 1,000-year-old trees, that only adult members can go on. So, we have our own grandchildren that are seeing how all kinds of individual too. And it's I will let people on those, but not reservation, only, but I'll skip it on that land. That's valuable. A small sign. Tribe program had to bring back the city to the wilderness for a lot of money. I don't remember all of the things that went for it. The qualification.
No, I was gonna speak. Can you get my glasses?
So, okay. I was supposed to be comedy. I was listening to some of the people here. That one person back there, they were doing comedy. They said, either you're gonna have a comedic experience, or what did they say? It was funny. It was like or a horror movie. Either not a horror movie or not a horror comedian. There we go. Not the way. The quantification of all resources, including human resources, played an integral role in the creation and indoctrination machine of education. As our mother's body, the land was divided into convenient squares known as townships. 2 sections of every township were set aside with the specific intent of financing the education system.
That's for all of you. All Indian alike. The resources were mandated by law to be profitable. When you're training, they gotta drill. They gotta cut down trees to maximize profit. They are there trees? They are to be logged. Are there minerals? They are to be mined. Are there metals? They are to be graded. Some of the money to finance the government boarding shoes came from this source. My uncle died in a mining accident, Sunshine Mine, Idaho. Like those who make decisions treated the land, they also treated the people most closely connected with the land. I came from a family that's by this commodification process. Some of my people attended school started by Catholics at St. Paul Mission in Hayes, Montana, and my family lived along the beautiful pristine creek known as Mission Creek, which flowed from the gold mine in Oregon and the past mission. Leaving the water and leaving us, I recently wrote a poem about this place, love and desecrated. I'm from Harlem. My stars are buried in the grave unseen. The criminal riding on the sheets unseen. One man's news, scrambled spelling, dead man's head not telling. I'm from Harlem, but the color is red and black. You've got books, you've got volumes, you've got libraries to the thousands. Millions of people that you emulate, stimulate, millions of people that you situate, regulate. You throw us in the pen, and you control the game. I'm from Harlem. Not Holland, not New York, but Harlem. Not in the city with busy streets, not so many lights that you can't see the stars, but the bars where you drink are not the same as the bars where you think. Across the street is the library where you study. Inside the church where you pray. Pray for your golden gates. Where you pray with your strings of pearl. This the Alcatraz rosary that hangs around your neck. Children, animals, women, that you prayed over and passed aside at the moment to buy with your altar boy and Indian boy that your priests with their grins look so coy. We pray to forgive you for all your crimes on our flesh. We let you take it, not by our offering. You pass the hat and the eyes of saving. You priests under their cloaks committing crimes. Whereas the written words are not gospel, whereas our memories will not be erased by your lies, whereas your erection of the Eucharist, sometimes secret, whereas the spelling cast upon us, which remains in the unseen graves and the unwritten words is spoken, and the rustling leaves of witness keys. Therefore I ask, who gave you the keys to enter our reservation? The bad man cried that he was the penance to keep the white devil out with their mortal sins. I'm from Harlem. Where we took a tree at cowboy houses and they put beer cans in our houses. They call it queer niggers. I'm from Harlem. I watch my heroes on TV, they regard like me, they were globetrotters with the laughing head, sign TVs like the red man, not drawing a white man's name. A black man honored the red man is not more staying. I'm from Harlem, we carry guns and kills, real bullets, a real game. Not like the city where they compete to shame. I'm from Harlem. I'm from Apollo. All white men inside will have delight. Some people consider the prairie a prison, but there are no gates out here. Most white men stay away with fear. I'm from Harlem. The water you threw that cleared on the Canyon. And to you, I was able to see the gold, those who hate, lies, and despair. From heart is still golden under their lilac bush. We rise to embrace our children again. I'm from Harlem, where the Catholic gates clash with Sundance Church. At Canyon Shop is the church. Actually, the birth of his spirit from this point. The wall protects Sundance Tree, and below is the gold mine, where Sacred Mountain used to be. They broke our mountain. I was at the standing rock protest. They built an entire mountain, had that beach line, the whole mountain's line. And included our creek. When the church is pink from the white man's shame, We got a little t-shirt out there, but I'm not really. So I have to come and tell you that, you guys didn't grow up there, you wouldn't know what the t-shirt is. I'm from Harlem, a investigator at the door asking for a blanket to cover my grandmother in the sparkling snow. My mom's last memory, and that you had him.
Thank you so much. Well, I don't know how to follow that. That was amazing and powerful. But this gift really is from the heart of our center and all the people here. And we're just again so honored, Mr. Dillon, that you joined us today. And I don't know if this will fit your back pocket or not. We're going to get it figured out. So thank you so much. Let's give him another hand. Thank you so much.
No one chases me down.
Very good. Well, we're now transitioning to our afternoon session focusing on protecting our children. And we have a lot of wonderful programs that have been in place for many years at the Center for Indigenous Health, and also some exciting new projects that we're moving forward with. And as we transition, I do want to acknowledge we do have a video from the Planetary Health Alliance that we can show a little bit later. But I do want to hand it over to my colleagues to facilitate the afternoon session. So it'll be our Executive Director, Alice Marlowe, and Co-Director, Melissa Wall. So please join me in welcoming them.
Stand up and shake out the feet. I know it's a lot, but to be real, many times throughout this day already, I found myself the piercing of the gut, the moments where I've been choking back tears. And if you don't feel the emotion when art is shared with us in those sorts of ways, or the words that we're hearing from scholars, from community members, then you're not, that's part of our humanity. So let it out. I wish we had smudge going in here, and maybe I have some medicine in my bag. Maybe we'll just light it up. I did that at the other Hopkins campus. Decolonizing spaces. Anyway, welcome to the afternoon session. Please take your restroom break, shake it out. I'm going to catch us up on time. I'm Melissa Walls. On my mother's side of the family, I am Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, from the Voice Fort Band of Ojibwe in northern Minnesota and the Couchiching First Nation in Ontario, Canada. I grew up in a town called International Falls, known as the icebox of the nation, which is 5 minutes from our reserve, an hour from the reservation. My mother is the last generation in our family to have dual enrollment in both the First Nation and the U.S. reservation. Loopholes in treaties allowed that to happen. On my dad's side, I'm a German-Swedish settler mix. There's lots of stories about that many have heard. I want to give a little credit to Anna here because she's been working this machine all day. Which Anna, are you going to do that for me too? Yep. Okay. So my job is to transition us to the afternoon. We can go ahead and that. Boy, that was only a few years ago, but I had a lot less wrinkles. Okay. And no gray hairs, and now they're here. Anna, you can go to the next slide. We're going to talk about strengths-based approaches, but I want to start us off. One of my jobs is to share a little note of gratitude. And many people and many agencies help to co-sponsor this event. And one of them is the Bloomberg American Health Initiative. And so I put the website here on our slide. I think Shane might have stepped out to use the restroom. Shane, oh, he's in the back. Shane is in the back. Did everybody wave at Shane with the blue star? But Shane is my colleague at the initiative. I'm one of the Bloomberg American Health Initiative professors in the Food Systems for Health track. But I want to bring up this initiative today because part of what is really compelling is fully funded MPH or DRPH programs to address all sorts of issues, many of which we're talking about today. One of them is environmental health. And so anyone in this room or online who has been thinking, oh, I might want to get an advanced degree in public health from Johns Hopkins University, please go visit Shane in the back or talk to me. We're happy to help. Application deadline is due next week, I think. So maybe not this year, but who knows, we could work it together very quickly. Maybe all of us in this room would be writing a lot of letters of recommendation. And I want to acknowledge that on the next slide is some of our current fellows that are part of a special track of Bloomberg American Health Initiative Fellows and Center for Indigenous Health Scholars. Let's give them a hand, please. Are any of them today? I can't see. No, but they're online, I know, some of them are online. So if anyone wants to reach out to one of these fellows, you can hear more about the good, bad, and ugly of the program. It's all good. Right. All right, let's keep it moving. So we're going to shift into this afternoon session into a focus on our children, right? We've been hearing about these interconnections the entire time. And this report that we just learned about was groundbreaking when it was released and continues to be groundbreaking in so many ways. You can find it online. It's very, just Google this. I want to share that for the first 15 years of my own career, I am guilty of leading projects where we perseverated on trauma, historical trauma. How do we measure it? What is cultural loss? How do we measure it? What are the impacts of residential and boarding schools on our families? All the while compartmentalizing the fact that I am a third generation residential school survivor. My grandpa Adams survived the St. Margaret's Catholic Indian School. And put a lot of energy into measuring trauma. When I hear someone speak like Brian Newland about the impact of some of that research on federal policy, it is heartening, but this is heavy. This is how we felt when we hear a poem. This is how we felt when we see the artwork happening. These are our lived experiences, our stories, our families. And so part of what I'm so excited about for the afternoon is shifting the narrative. And moving into, as we heard earlier, here she comes walking in, some of the people who are involved with making our Indigenous knowledges matter at a federal level through policy change. Put a little piece of your own work up here on the slide as you sit down. And I share one quote out of this policy shift. Had our traditional cultural practices and ceremony not been outlawed, had our information keepers been listened to over the centuries, we would not find ourselves in the position we're in today. That bridges planetary health with the health of our communities so beautifully. And there are so many models, as you heard this morning, from Indigenous well-being frameworks. This one from a Native scholar, Alaska Native scholar, Jessica Ulrich, about how we view intergenerational connectedness to be more than human beings, as you've heard about all morning. These models are actually very complex and describe mechanisms through which programs and policies can enact change and give us hope to address the things we heard about this morning. I'd like to share from our own center, Dr. Migas Gonzalez's work around Anishinaabe models of well-being. And this idea, Jessica was a part of this work with us as well, that I think I heard Dr. Redvers talk about, which is there is no scarcity. The creator, our teaching is the creator gave us everything on this planet that we need to live well. Everything. It's all there. We have lost connections to it. We have lost our reciprocity, the reciprocity necessary to take care of those things, or it has been taken. But we can reclaim it, and we're working on that. And these beautiful cyclical models are about abundance and growth. There is no scarcity. There is no fear. When you look at these models, when you live these ways, I am comforted. And so I hope that you all feel that hope as we move into the afternoon session. And so what we have learned through decades of research now is culture, variously conceptualized, these teachings of connection, the ways that we measure them. This is empirical evidence that it leads to good health. It leads to healing. It leads to the health of our planet, of all of us. I I have to acknowledge Dr. Victoria O'Keefe, who's in the room. She'll be on a panel this afternoon. We are now in the next wave of Indigenous strengths-based research. Prevention science, public health, medicine has perseverated on trauma and illness and pathology for centuries now. Enough. Let's shift that narrative, let's balance it. And I love how Victoria led this publication where we really thought about 6 different major themes related to the way that we can center strength in our work. And each one, again, could be an entire course, an entire semester. But look, generating and transforming our futures. How hopeful is that? Intergenerational healing and flourishing, our collective wisdom. All of this is beautiful. All of this is strength-based. And I hope I caught us up on some time as I move us into the afternoon session with some of our scholars. To help us introduce them, I'm going to pass the mic over to Allison.
Thank you very much. I just first want to tell you, I'm not an Indigenous person. I have had the incredible honor and blessing to work with our center since it was founded in 1991. And I couldn't be more honored to stand beside Donna and Melissa as co-directors, but also all of our Indigenous folks who are here today, who you'll be hearing from, and the others at the center that really work and support our work. And so grateful for all of you to be here. I've been blown away by all that we've heard today, and I think Dr. Redford's really, what she left with me is open space for Indigenous people to reclaim and restate their wisdom and knowledge, and the earth will heal. It's almost that simple, like make the space and the earth will heal. And so that's our responsibility as non-Indigenous people, is to create more space, make space. What I'm really excited about is my work at the center has been to help support the early childhood work. And what is so profound, you know, in Western science, we talk about the first 1,000 days of life, and it seems like this revelation, it's the most important time of human development, but we really singularize it to that little human, right? And what we're learning today, what we'll continue to learn, is that life is at the center of this web, right? That life comes into the world and new relationships spring from the caregivers to the grandparents to the planet, because those are the little people who hold sacred knowledge to carry us forward. But that relies on the communities and the caregivers being well enough to take those children to their natural strengths and their natural skills and their natural gifts. So what we're going to learn about this afternoon from my colleagues is what work can be done to uplift that idea. And we have so much to learn from Indigenous communities. And I really hope that we have this next year, we have 5 times the amount of people here from all different walks of life, because again, I really believe that Indigenous knowledge is our great space and the planet will heal. So I want to ask my colleagues to come up, Crystal Austin, Emily Harrows, and Joshua Allison Burbank. They each are involved in really different prisms of a larger project called Family Spirit. And Family Spirit is an early childhood home visiting program that was designed originally by White Mountain Apaches and Carlos Apache and Navajo Nations in partnership with folks at our center. And I can't wait for them to talk with me. So Chris, I think you're up first. We're just gonna go right into it. We're gonna have a Q&A afterwards, so we'll be turning space for that.
Stay here.
Really?
Yes. Really. Yeah.
Yat-A is the word for it is well, in the language of my people, which is Dinit. And, so Yat A means it is well, and just in this, being in this space with each of you, I'm very honored to be able to, share this time and have an exchange of information, knowledge, and energy. So Yat A to all of you. I also introduced myself in my language by paying homage to who I am. I'm Zuni Edgewater. My fathers are the Towering Bronx people. My maternal grandfather is from the Bitterwater, and my paternal grandfather is from the Yucca Strung Out people. And so I'm a proud member of the Navajo Nation, and I worked for the center for a number of years. And so just hearing each and every, all of our speakers this morning has been very moving. I think that just as we listen to stories such as these, there is, our blood remembers all of these things. And so a lot of times when I'm hearing this, I'm in the back moved to tears because it just resonates so deeply and in ways that is really hard to articulate. So I've had the honor of being able to work with families for a number of years. And this came about sort of accidentally. I started off in my career as an early childhood development teacher. And then I had was going to have my firstborn daughter, who is now 17. And so when I left my position as a teacher, I thought that, I would spend that first year and a half with her. And when I was ready to go back into the workforce, I thought I was going to go do something that was very easy. So I applied for a position in home visiting because children and families was something that I just thoroughly enjoyed working with. And found out after the first few weeks just how hard the work was, but also just how meaningful it was. And so home visiting and the upriver work has been something that I've pursued since. So I've actually started working in Family Spirit, and Family Spirit is a program, it's a home visitation model. And so I realized that in going to people's homes that there was such a richness, such strengths that people had, and I didn't recognize how there was also a lot of issues that were there. And sometimes when you're just kind of living in the moment, it's really hard to be able to see what is going to be, what is something that you can lean on. What are those strengths that you're able to find? And when I was growing up, I ended up being raised by numerous people in my home, in my family. So my mom was, young, and she was by herself, trying to raise me. But I was raised with, but she had a lot of help. I had really loving grandparents. I had uncles who always said, Ethan, listen up. I had aunts who were just, always acting as my second mom. So I was very fortunate to be able to be surrounded by just a really wonderful group of people who always made me feel loved and supported. And so Family Spirit is sort of an extension of what that meant. So once, a long time ago, as you guys know, the ways that we have always lived, the norms of our people has been stripped away, as you've heard from several different people this morning. And systematically, the attack of our families have really left really deep scars. And so from that, we have been working really to try to heal from that. And so we have really leaned into what we call the resilience of our people, these innate strengths that each of them have. We've also been able to really try to center what is our Indigenous people's knowledge and their life lessons and their ways of observing and their ways of interacting, their ways of understanding the world that is around them. And this has really been something that we have tried to include in a program called Family Spirit. So in 1995, our center had really been out in the Southwest on White Mountain Apache, really just doing work around infectious disease prevention. So we had home visitors or health educators going into communities and working with families, and they were doing a lot of work around immunization studies and vaccines, etc. And so as our home visitors are going into these places, there was also a recognition that there was a different type of need. And that was the need to be able to support our young families with education, with resources, and just being there. And that used to be the way that many of us were also raised, is just by being able to kind of have our mothers and our aunties and our grandmothers all convene on these, young women that were raising children and helping them. And so the first, so then we began to create curricula, and over the years, the curricula has changed and evolved. And now it is the first and only evidence-based early childhood home visiting program that is designed for our communities. It has really been able to address a lot of different issues. So, when we go into having children, a lot of times you're spending only 10 minutes in a doctor's office. And in that time, there's so many unanswered information that you leave with. You probably actually develop more questions than just from that one visit than you have, but it's so embarrassing to ask. For whatever reason, when you're talking to a provider who doesn't look like you, who's using words that you can barely understand, it is hard to ask questions. And so when you have someone coming into your someone else that comes into your home and is telling you information about your pregnancy, or the way that your child is growing, or the way that your child is learning and developing, then it becomes a lot more comfortable, and it becomes more easier to be able to ask these questions. And so we've also have found from doing these family spirit work, we've done 3 randomized control trials, and these have really shared some really promising and really evidence around mothers being able to have more maternal knowledge. They've decreased maternal depression and substance use, and there has been an improved social and emotional and behavioral development of the children. And so this is probably largely due to because that there's always someone constantly there, and that is really just the way of the structure of our communities, where we're able to have relationships at the core of everything that we do. So this is just a really quick overview of Family Spirit. It's been around for over 25 years. It started off as a program that was just really focused on nutrition, and over time that's changed to include information around life skills and child development, and just a whole slew of different information. And right around when I came back to the center in 2012, I was asked to really help with the expansion and dissemination of the Family Spirit program. And back then, there was just a small group of us, and it was a very mom and pop shop. Someone would give us a call interested in learning about the model and perhaps implementing it in their own community. And the phone call would come in, and I pick up the phone and I tell them, who I am, share a little bit about what the program was, and then they ask information about graphics or whatever, and then I switch the phone to the other side and continue to talk. And so it was a very small mom and pop shop, but over the years we've grown into over 26 states. So the several components of the Family Spirit program is that it's really just something that is it's designed to help reclaim and strengthen our connections to ourselves and to our culture and our heritage by highlighting the voices and stories and teachings that are rooted in our cultures and that are based on our traditional values that we still hold very strongly, we hold on tightly to today. And so these connections really are the key to help our families thrive and promote healing within our communities. And so some of the full components of the Family Spirit is just having someone come in and provide and visit with you on a regular basis. So we have home visitors who just are very compassionate about what they do. They deliver lessons. They're able to meet with the children and include all of the people that are in the household who are interested in wanting to be a part of these sessions. They are also using different methodologies. You know, there's a curriculum that we've created, but the way that it is taught, they use stories that these families are familiar with. The information that is shared is coupled with information that the community is familiar with, that is used to. And it is also an opportunity for home visitors to share information that the families are also not familiar with. Meaning that, you know, when I was a home visitor, one young girl that I was talking to, I was telling her, I was trying to recruit her into the program, and I said, you know, this is something that we do. We offer cultural information. And she asked me, what do you know? And I thought, whoa, you know, like, just what can you tell me? She said, and I wasn't sure where that question was coming from. And so I looked at her, and then she says, I'm asking because I really want to know. I don't have anyone to teach me this. And I just thought that was truly, truly amazing. And usually this is the time when we lean on our elders to be able to share information about culture. But sometimes we, you know, and in many cases, we do not have that luxury of bringing an elder with us to these home visits, you know. So home visitors have that really big task of being able to stop and share what they know. And even though that some of the information might be different depending on where the community that they live. So on the Navajo Nation, we have large landmass. And so when we have somebody coming from one area, it might be a little bit different from another area. We also have this home visiting program is also something that really focuses on strength. You know, too many times we're always told, you know, what is wrong with us. You know, we know that we are living in poverty. We know that we need to finish school. We know that we need to, and there's all of these things that we're often told. And sometimes home visitors are just doing this task of helping families uncover all of their strengths. You know, if they go into a home and they see on the walls, see on the floors that there's laundry piles or, you know, dishes in this thing, it's easy for someone to come in and say, wow, you know, I see all of this. But then home visitors who are doing this work come in and they don't see that. They see the artwork that is on the wall. They see the, you know, the learning posters that people, you know, that they have on their walls, or the, you know, all of the ways that these families are interacting with their children. Those are the things that they see and they try to lift out. They help families also just navigate the resources that are available, because we know that there is, you know, these home visitors aren't able to do everything and provide everything. So they connect families to the resources that they need. And then there's also, you know, that these visits last for over 3 years. And believe it or not, we are actually at a time where families want the services to continue into the child's 5th year. And this is just an example of some of the content that our home visitors teach. So from very child development focused information to things that are a little bit harder around life skills. But all of these, I know that at some point, mothers and fathers and caregivers of all types are going to be able to teach these to their children, and then the children will be able to pass on that knowledge. So as I said, you know, Family Spirit is in 26 states across the country, and soon it'll be going into the world. So last year we applied for a Lego Foundation grant called Build a World of Play, and we won that at the end of last year. And this allows us to actually expand the Family Spirit program into Australia, into First Nations Canada, and to Ottawa. And so it's just an amazing, amazing opportunity, because all of us have this really shared values, shared beliefs, shared history, and it only makes sense that we have some tool that we're able to kind of use to be able to work with our communities. So some of the key successes about Family Spirit has been that a lot of the people that come in and they decide that they want to utilize Family Spirit. A lot of the local communities have agency over what this program becomes. So that it is community driven, that it's strength-based, and it allows for a lot of local capacity building. You know, our health educators or our home visitors come in, and when they are learning all of the skills and the tasks of, you know, supporting these families, a lot of times that is carried into many other places. And we also have this model works with small and large agencies, so it's very flexible. And some of our work that we are going to be going into is just around precision home visiting. So we know that there isn't a one size fits all approach. And so we have different ways, and some of my colleagues are going to talk about that today, but we have been able to utilize Family Spirit as the root, as the core for all of these other programs that we've developed. And so some of them are listed here on the Family Spirit Nurture, Strengths, Language is Medicine, Thrive, and that's the curriculum that is going to be for the 3 to 5 year olds. We're also looking at traditional parenting practices through our Indigenous doulas. And then we have programs that are looking at substance use and mental health stress. And my colleagues here are going to talk a little bit more about that. And so we hope over the next couple of years and more that we're going to continue to expand our scope and develop and improve and scale these new modules. We want to continue to build evidence, and we also continue to want to sustain our programs. So I wanted to just, you know, of all of the things that we are talking about, one of the planetary health. What really reminded me of a story that that a brother told me. His name is Lyle Harvey. He said that children and raising corn are very similar. And he said as he went out to go water the corn, he was reminded of this, that the children or the corn, they are in the womb now, in the mother's darkness, Shashti. You must ask the earth and the sun to nourish your children and give them nutrients and love. Talk to your corn as a baby. Tell them that they are going to grow good and healthy. Fill them with strength and motivation to grow. Sing to them, and they will soon want to experience the sunlight, air, and the living world. Soon the head and ears will make their appearance. Our elders call this Nadam Jazmin. And so as we are out raising our children, you know, they are a big investment. And so earlier when I mentioned my clan and introduced myself, we have such a beauty in our culture that we recognize who we are as the grandchildren and the children of all of these extraordinary things, this environment, this planet that we are a part of, universe that we are a part of. And we recognize that all of its beings in some shape or form influences who we are. And so if we're able to teach our children to stand firm and know to stand firm in their identity and be confident about where that they come from, we are really passing on that responsibility to not just themselves, but to the environment and the planet. You know, they will know from where they stand. And you know, when we start our prayers, we say "Kodo Kajono," and that means here, where the earth is. From here, from where I stand, that's where beauty is going to begin. And so if they can understand, if we can help them to understand how they are a part of this larger, beautiful matrix of things, of who they are, you know, I think that is where we're going to be able to help our planet. So thank you guys so much for your time.